The millionaire's son stopped speaking the day his mother died. The boy's silence became a wall that even the best therapists in the world couldn't break down. The father, a man used to solving everything with money, was lost, watching his son drift further away. That's when a simple housekeeper, a woman of few words and a gentle gaze, was hired. No one expected anything from her. Then, one day, arriving home early from work, the father heard a perfect voice, like that of an angel, singing a lullaby coming from the room. The melody was the same one his late wife used to sing. The scene he found next made him break down in tears. The loudest sound in Arthur Caldwell's mansion was the silence, a dense, heavy silence that seeped through the marble corridors, climbed the oak staircases, and nestled in the corners of the vast, empty rooms. It was a silence that mocked his fortune, a constant echo of his greatest failure. From his office, a sanctuary of glass and steel overlooking the meticulously manicured Connecticut gardens, Arthur watched his son, Leo, on a security monitor. The 7-year-old boy was in the center of the most extravagant playroom money could buy, surrounded by an army of action figures, toy cars, and video games. Yet, Leo did not play. He was building a tower of blocks with a concentration that bordered on sadness, each piece placed without a sound, without an exclamation of triumph or frustration. The tower rose, precarious and solitary, a fragile monument to the inaudible world Leo had built around himself ever since his mother, Laura, had passed away. Selective mutism. The doctor's diagnosis sounded like a life sentence. Arthur, a man who built an empire from scratch, whose decisions on Wall Street could shift the fortunes of thousands, felt utterly destitute before that invisible wall. He had mobilized his capital, hired the top specialists, renowned child psychologists who charged a king's ransom and promised miracles. None of them had managed to extract a single syllable from Leo. They would come, speak in soft voices, use puppets and colorful cards, and then leave, leaving behind only the sound of their own footsteps and invoices that barely scratched the surface of his wealth. His businesses thrived, his assets multiplied, but joy had become a liability on his life's balance sheet. The house, once filled with Laura's laughter and Leo's chatter, had become a mausoleum. Every object, every photograph was a painful reminder of a revenue stream of happiness that had been abruptly cut off. Desperate, Arthur made a decision that his head housekeeper, the severe and pragmatic Judith, considered sheer nonsense. He hired a new cleaning lady. Her name was Sophia. Her resume was simple, with no references from other mansions or letters of recommendation from affluent families. A young widow with a look in her eyes that seemed to carry its own history of loss. Judith introduced her with restrained disdain. "She's here for the cleaning position, sir. The references are modest, but she seems to need the work." Arthur barely glanced at the paper. His eyes were fixed on the monitor, on Leo's block tower that was now teetering dangerously. "Again, hire her," he said, his voice hoarse. That afternoon, Sophia began. Arthur watched her through the cameras, a habit that had become both his torture and his only connection to his son. Judith instructed her with sharp gestures, pointing to the furniture that needed polishing, the floors that demanded a shine. But when Sophia entered the playroom, she stopped. She didn't pick up a duster or a cloth. She looked at Leo, not as a problem to be managed, but as the center of gravity in the silent room. Slowly, she sat down on the soft rug, at a respectful distance, without saying a word. She didn't try to smile or wave. She just sat. Leo, who never noticed anyone entering or leaving, froze. His hand, holding the last blue block, was suspended in mid-air. For the first time in months, his eyes shifted from the tower and landed, hesitantly, on the quiet figure of the woman on the floor. He didn't look at her directly, but a subtle, almost imperceptible turn of his head indicated that her presence had breached the barrier of his silence. Arthur leaned forward, his heart pounding erratically. What was happening? She was doing nothing, absolutely nothing. And yet, in that shared silence, a tiny crack seemed to have opened in his son's sealed world. Arthur didn't press the button. His finger recoiled as if the plastic of the intercom had burned him. He was a man who built his empire on calculated decisions, on cold analyses of risk and reward. Firing Judith, who had managed his house with the precision of a Swiss watch for over a decade, over a gut feeling, an intuition, seemed reckless. It would be a decision driven by emotion, and Arthur had learned early on that in his business, emotion was the shortest path to a loss. He leaned back in his leather chair, eyes fixed on the screen, feeling a wave of self-loathing. What kind of man was he? A giant in the business world, a multimillionaire whose predictions on the crypto market were followed like gospel, but a coward in his own home. He watched, helpless, as Sophia rose slowly, not with the haste of someone who had been reprimanded, but with a quiet dignity. She didn't look at the camera, but Arthur felt as if her gaze pierced right through it. Before leaving, she knelt, picked up the chess piece Leo had knocked over, the white king, and placed it gently back in the center of the board. It was a small gesture, but one that screamed a silent challenge. Order can be restored with kindness, not with fear. Leo, who still had his hands over his ears, slowly lowered them and looked at the upright king on the board. In the days that followed, a palpable tension settled over the mansion. Judith supervised Sophia with an eagle eye, criticizing the smallest forgotten speck of dust, timing her tasks with military rigidity. Sophia, in turn, fulfilled her duties with a serenity that seemed to irritate Judith even more. She polished the silverware until it reflected her calm face, made the hardwood floors so shiny they looked like pools of water, but always, somehow, found her way back to be near Leo. The silent sessions on the playroom floor became shorter, more furtive, stolen between one task and another. They were moments of mute complicity, a small act of rebellion against the tyranny of order. Arthur continued to watch, the internal conflict eating away at him. Every profit report from his financial ventures, every news bulletin about his rising stocks seemed irrelevant. He had a net worth most people couldn't spend in 10 lifetimes, yet he couldn't buy peace for his son. Leo's silence seemed to have deepened after the confrontation with Judith, as if the housekeeper's harshness had added another brick to his wall. The hope Arthur had felt the previous week withered, becoming just another item on his long list of failed investments. It was on a rainy Tuesday afternoon that everything changed. Arthur decided to come home early, tired of staring at charts that went up while the joy in his life plummeted. He entered the mansion expecting the usual silence, which the rain against the window panes only made more oppressive. But as he closed the heavy door behind him, he heard something. A faint, almost ethereal sound floating through the vast entrance hall. He stopped, his heart giving a painful leap in his chest. It wasn't the sound of the television or a radio. It was music. It was a piano. The notes were hesitant but clear, playing a melody he knew intimately. A lullaby Laura used to play, the piano in the music room. No one had touched that piano since she was gone. It was kept locked, covered, a dusty monument to his grief, with steps that barely dared to make a sound on the polished marble. Arthur followed the music, each note pulling him forward, a mixture of dread and overwhelming hope growing inside him. The music room door was ajar. He peeked through the crack, his body tense, preparing himself for whatever he might find inside. The scene that unfolded before Arthur's eyes was like an oil painting coming to life, a composition of soft light and raw emotion that rooted him to the spot. The music room, usually steeped in shadow and the scent of dust and stored memories, was bathed in the grey afternoon light filtering through the tall window. The velvet cover that protected the grand piano was folded over a sofa, and sitting at the bench, her back to the door, was Sophia, Her fingers glided over the ivory keys with a familiarity that belied her position as a cleaner. The notes floating in the air were no longer hesitant. They formed the complete melody of Laura's lullaby, a tune Arthur thought he would never hear again outside of his own tortured memories. But it wasn't just the music that paralyzed him. At the foot of the piano, sitting on a Persian rug, was Leo. He wasn't building towers or lining up cars. He was completely still, his face lifted, his large, dark eyes fixed on Sophia. There was an expression on his face that Arthur hadn't seen in an eternity, a deep calm, a complete surrender to the moment. Then Sophia's voice rose, soft and clear as running water, weaving the lyrics of the lullaby between the piano notes. She didn't sing loudly, but with a tenderness that filled every corner of the room. It was the voice of a mother, the voice of an angel, the voice of hope itself. Arthur felt the air leave his lungs, his legs weakened, and he leaned against the doorframe to keep from falling. A wave of conflicting emotions hit him with the force of a tidal wave. There was the searing pain of memory, the image of Laura sitting at that same bench, singing to a baby Leo in her lap. There was anger at himself for allowing that instrument, that room, to become a tomb for joy. And there was gratitude. A gratitude so overwhelming it burned in his throat for this woman who, with a simple act, had resurrected a piece of his world. But the real miracle was yet to come. As Sophia sang, Arthur saw something that made his heart stop and then bolt like a racehorse. Leo's lips. They were moving, subtly, almost imperceptibly, but they were moving. He wasn't producing sound, but he was silently forming the words of the song, his face a mirror of concentration and longing. It was the first time in over a year, that he had tried to communicate, that he had tried to connect with the outside world through language. Years of therapy, fortunes spent on specialists, and nothing. Now, a cleaning lady, with an old song and an infinite dose of patience, was achieving the impossible. The song ended. The last notes of the piano hung in the air and then faded, leaving behind a different kind of silence. A silence not of emptiness, but of peace. Sophia turned slowly on the bench, and her gaze met Leo's. She smiled, a genuine smile, sad and beautiful at the same time, that seemed to understand all the pain in the world. And Leo, in response, did something that broke Arthur into a million pieces. He reached out his small hand and gently touched Sophia's knee. A touch, a simple touch that meant everything. In that instant, Arthur Caldwell, the billionaire, the titan of finance, the man who commanded an empire, felt like the smallest of men. He wasn't a boss watching an employee. He was a broken father witnessing his son's healing. The tears he had held back for so long finally defeated him, streaming silently down his face as he watched the scene that none of his assets, none of his stocks or gold investments could ever buy. The door creaked slightly under his weight, and Sophia looked up, her smile vanishing as she saw him. Panic flashed across her face. She jumped to her feet as if caught committing a crime. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have," she stammered, her hands twisting the simple fabric of her uniform. She thought she would be reprimanded, perhaps fired, for her audacity. But Arthur could barely speak. He just shook his head, trying to find his voice, trying to express the storm of gratitude raging inside him. Before he could form a word, another voice, shrill and full of indignation, shattered the sacred moment. "What is the meaning of this?" Judith stood in the hallway, hands on her hips, her face a mask of fury. The venom in Judith's voice was so palpable that the air in the music room seemed to freeze. The atmosphere of peace and connection shattered like glass. Leo, who had been standing near Sophia, flinched instantly, his small body shrinking as if expecting a blow. His eyes, which moments before had shone with a new light, turned dull again, mirrors of an old fear The head housekeeper marched into the room, her hard-soled shoes clacking on the wooden floor, each step a declaration of violated authority. "Unbelievable! Absolutely unbelievable!" she hissed, completely ignoring Arthur's presence, who was still paralyzed in the doorway. Her focus was entirely on Sophia, who remained standing by the piano, her face pale but her posture erect. Oh, first, the loitering in the playroom. Now this, profaning Mrs. Caldwell's piano, an instrument worth more than everything you will ever own in your life. This is the last straw. The attack was brutal, calculated to humiliate. Judith gestured to the piano with theatrical contempt. "Your job is to dust, not to give private concerts. Who do you think you are? Do you think that just because you work in a house like this, you can take possession of the family's belongings, touch personal items, invade Mr. Caldwell's privacy and his grief?" Every word was a knife, and Arthur saw Sophia falter, the dignity in her shoulders sagging a little under the weight of the accusation. She opened her mouth to reply, but no words came out. The injustice of the situation was suffocating. She hadn't profaned anything. She had sanctified that space, filling it with life again. Arthur finally found his voice, a cold fury rising in his chest, a fury he normally reserved for hostile takeover negotiations. "Judith," he said, his tone low and sharp, causing the housekeeper to turn, startled. The look of shock on her face upon seeing her employer, his face wet with tears, was almost comical. "Mr. Caldwell, I didn't know you were there. I was just—" "I know exactly what you were doing," Arthur interrupted, taking a step into the room. He glanced from Judith to Sophia and then to Leo, who was now hiding behind Sophia's legs, clinging to the fabric of her uniform like a castaway to a life raft. That simple gesture from his son sealed the decision in his mind. The most important investment of his life wasn't in his hedge funds or his stock portfolio. It was right there, in that room, trembling with fear. Sophia wasn't profaning anything. She was doing what none of your rigid protocols, what none of my money could ever do. She was bringing my son back to me. The statement hung in the air, charged with irrefutable weight. Judith gaped, her face turning from red with rage to white with shock. She looked at Leo, hidden behind the cleaning lady, and an expression of disbelief and perhaps jealousy flickered in her eyes. She had always prided herself on her loyalty, her impeccable management of the estate's assets and routine. The idea that a newcomer, a simple cleaner, could succeed where the entire structure she commanded had failed was an unbearable blow to her pride. "Sir, with all due respect, you're being sentimental," Judith said, regaining her composure, but her voice was slightly shaky. "This woman is an employee. There are rules, boundaries. If you start allowing this sort of intimacy, you'll lose control of your staff. Managing a house of this magnitude requires discipline, not music sessions." Arthur walked slowly until he stood between the two women, positioning himself as a shield for Sophia and Leo. He looked directly into Judith's eyes, the coldness in his gaze, the same one that froze opponents in boardrooms. "The only control I'm interested in, Judith, is the one I lost over my own family's happiness. For years, I trusted your discipline. I followed your protocols. The result was this silence, this emptiness. Today, for the first time, I heard music in this house. I saw my son alive, and you wanted to punish the person responsible for it." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Perhaps the problem isn't a lack of discipline. Perhaps the problem is the wrong kind of discipline. Judith took a step back, the arrogance in her posture finally cracking, replaced by a flicker of fear. She realized she had crossed a line, that she had catastrophically misjudged the situation. She had underestimated the father's desperation and the power of a simple song. The ensuing silence was broken by a tiny, almost inaudible sound. It came from Leo, clinging to Sophia's leg. He looked up at his father. His lips moved, and a puff of air shaped into a word escaped. "Dad." The word was faint, rusty from disuse, but it was unmistakably clear. To Arthur, it sounded louder and more valuable than the opening bell on Wall Street, more precious than all the gold stored in vaults. The entire world stopped in that instant. Leo's single word, Dad, hung in the air like the final, perfect note of a symphony. It redefined the balance of power in that room more decisively than any command Arthur could have given. Judith stood motionless, her mouth slightly agape, the color draining completely from her face. It was as if she had witnessed a ghost speak. Sophia, in turn, brought a hand to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears, not of fear, but of pure, overwhelming emotion. She knelt slowly, bringing herself to Leo's level, and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder as if to anchor him. Arthur felt the impact of that word in every fiber of his being. It was an electric shock that rebooted his heart. He took a step forward and crouched down as well, facing his son, ignoring Judith's presence, ignoring everything except the small face that looked at him with a clarity he hadn't seen in an eternity. "Leo," he whispered, his voice thick, afraid that at any moment he might wake from a dream. You spoke." Leo didn't repeat the word. Instead, he took his hand from Sophia's uniform and reached it toward Arthur. His small fingers touched his father's rough cheek, a gesture of such profound intimacy that it made Arthur's world of business and capital seem distant and meaningless. In that touch, there was forgiveness, there was longing, there was an invitation back into a world they had both lost. Arthur closed his eyes, soaking in the moment, the warmth of that small hand against his skin, worth more than his entire inheritance, his entire net worth. He was no longer the multimillionaire, the industry titan. He was just a father finding his way back home. When he opened his eyes, he looked at Sophia, who was still kneeling beside Leo, sharing the moment with quiet grace. Their eyes met over the boy's head, and in them, Arthur saw an understanding that went beyond words. She wasn't just an employee, she was the catalyst for this miracle. She had found the key that neither his fortune nor his power could buy. "Thank you," he mouthed, the word heavy with 1,000 emotions. Sophia just nodded, a small, sad and understanding smile on her lips. The moment was finally broken by Judith, who, realizing she had irredeemably lost control of the situation, attempted one last, desperate tactical move, appealing to protocol, the only language she truly understood. "Sir, this is wonderful, a real breakthrough," she said, her voice forcedly professional. "Perhaps now is the time to call Dr. Miller. He needs to document this progress, adjust the therapy. I can call him immediately." The suggestion was so absurdly inappropriate, so clinically cold, that Arthur felt a fresh wave of anger. "No, Judith," he said, standing up, bringing Leo with him, who clung to his hand. "There will be no calls to Dr. Miller. The therapy, for now, stays in this room." He looked at the piano and then at Sophia. "Starting today, Sophia, in addition to your other duties, you will have a new responsibility. I want you to spend 1 hour every day here in this room with Leo. The piano is not to be covered again. The music is not to be silenced again." It was an order, but also a plea. He was entrusting her with his most precious asset, not as an employer to an employee, but as a desperate man to a savior. Sophia's eyes widened. "But, sir, Judith, my tasks." "I will reorganize the tasks," Arthur said, his tone final and unquestionable. He finally looked at Judith, whose expression was a mixture of defeat and resentment. "Sophia will report directly to me regarding Leo. The rest of the house remains under your supervision. Are we clear?" "Yes, sir," Judith replied, her voice clipped and emotionless. She shot a quick, venomous glance at Sophia before turning and leaving the room, her wounded dignity in every step. The air felt lighter with her departure. Arthur, still holding Leo's hand, felt a sense of triumph that no financial transaction had ever given him. He had made an investment in the right place, in the right person. He knew nothing about Sophia's past, about her own griefs or dreams. He only knew that she possessed a wealth that couldn't be measured in dollars, the ability to heal. "Sophia," he said, his voice softer now, "if it's not too much to ask, could you play again?" Sophia looked at Leo's hopeful face and then at Arthur. She nodded, and without a word returned to the piano bench. As her fingers found the keys and the lullaby began to fill the room once more, Arthur sat on a nearby sofa, with Leo nestled beside him. For the first time in a very long time, the mansion didn't feel like a mausoleum, it felt like a home. But as the music played, Arthur couldn't help but notice the shadow that had crossed Judith's eyes before she left. It wasn't just anger, it was something darker, more calculating. He had won a battle, but he felt with an uneasy certainty that the war for the heart of his home was far from over. The following week was like living in a parallel reality. The mansion, once a domain of silence and rigid rules, now had a beating heart. The music room. Every day at 3 o'clock sharp, Sophia would set aside her cloths and cleaning supplies, wash her hands, and sit at the piano. Leo would already be waiting for her, sitting on the rug, his eyes shining with anticipation. Arthur adjusted his business schedule, cancelling meetings and postponing important conference calls just so he could be home, in his office, listening to the music and the sounds coming from that room. It wasn't just the lullaby. Sophia had a surprising repertoire. She played soft classical pieces by Chopin and Debussy, folk songs Arthur had never heard, and simple, cheerful melodies from animated movie soundtracks. And Leo reacted to it all. He didn't speak much, but he began to make sounds. He would hum along with the melodies, a wonderful out-of-tune buzz. He would clap his hands to the rhythm. One day, Arthur saw him, through the ajar door, get up and dance, spinning clumsily, a pure, radiant smile on his face. Every laugh, every hummed note was like an unexpected profit, a dividend of happiness that enriched Arthur's soul in a way his vast portfolio of assets never could. While the connection between Sophia and Leo blossomed, the atmosphere in the rest of the house soured. Judith moved like a storm cloud, her efficiency now tinged with a bitter resentment. She followed Arthur's orders to the letter, but her disapproval was evident in every gesture. She spoke to Sophia only when strictly necessary, in clipped monosyllables. To the other staff, she subtly painted a picture of Sophia as an opportunist, a manipulator who had taken advantage of the family's grief to secure a privileged position. "You have to be careful with people like that," Arthur overheard her telling one of the kitchen staff in the hallway. "You give them an inch, and they'll take the whole estate." The veiled slander infuriated him, but he chose not to intervene directly, fearing it would only further isolate Sophia and make her a bigger target. He watched, however, and saw how Sophia handled the hostility. She met it with the same quiet grace with which she had met Leo's mutism. She never complained, never responded to the provocations. She continued her work diligently, her head held high, treating everyone, including Judith, with unshakable politeness. Her strength wasn't in words, but in her calm resilience. It was during one of these musical afternoons that Arthur decided to approach. He left his office and walked to the music room, stopping at the open door. Sophia was teaching Leo the notes on the keyboard, guiding his small fingers over the keys. "C, D, E," she said softly. Leo repeated the sounds, his voice still a bit hesitant, but clear. "C, D, E." The scene was so normal, so domestically happy, that Arthur felt a pang of something he dared not name. He cleared his throat to announce his presence. Sophia looked up, surprised. But there was no panic in her face this time, just a faint blush on her cheeks. Leo, seeing his father, beamed and waved. "Dad, piano," he said, pointing to the keys. "Yes, son," "Piano," Arthur replied, his heart swelling. He entered the room. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "You're not interrupting, sir," Sophia said, her voice a little shy. "Leo is a very quick learner. He has his mother's ear." The mention of Laura was natural, devoid of pity or awkwardness. It was a simple fact, stated with kindness. Arthur sat on the sofa, the same one where the piano's velvet cover now rested permanently. You play as if you've been doing it your whole life." A veil of sadness passed over Sophia's eyes, so quickly that Arthur almost thought he had imagined it. "Music was my life," she said simply. "I have a degree in music therapy." The revelation struck him. Music therapy. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place. It wasn't just kindness or intuition. She had knowledge, she had the tools, but she used them with her heart, not with the clinical distance of the therapists he had hired. "You're a music therapist?" he asked, stunned. Why are you working as a cleaning lady?" Sophia's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Life can throw us out of tune sometimes, Mr. Caldwell. My husband, he passed away 2 years ago. After that, I lost my own music. It's hard to help others find harmony when your own life is just noise, cleaning. It was simple. It demanded nothing of my heart." In that moment, Arthur understood the depth of this woman. She wasn't just a savior. She was a wounded soul, just like him and Leo. They were 3 broken instruments, and somehow, in that room, they were helping to fix each other. The empathy he felt for her was overwhelming, a wave that caught him by surprise. It was more than gratitude. It was a connection, a sense of recognition that their pain, though from different sources, spoke the same language. The conversation was interrupted by the buzz of Arthur's phone. It was his broker, calling about an urgent investment opportunity in Bitcoin, a deal that could yield millions in profit. "Mr. Caldwell, are you there? We need to decide now." Arthur looked at the phone screen, at the numbers and charts that represented his world. Then he looked at Sophia and Leo, sitting side by side at the piano bench. The contrast was stark. On one side, the promise of more wealth, more capital. On the other, the picture of true wealth, of his real assets. Without hesitation, he ended the call. The business opportunity could wait. He already had the most profitable investment of his life right in front of him. The end of the second week marked a turning point, a seismic shift that shook the mansion's foundations in a way no one could have predicted. It all began subtly. Arthur noticed small acts of sabotage directed at Sophia. A bucket of dirty water, accidentally spilled in the hallway she had just cleaned. Cleaning supplies that disappeared from her closet and reappeared in illogical places. They were pinpricks designed to destabilize her, to make her seem incompetent. Sophia never complained, simply redoing the work or patiently searching for her materials, her calm exterior belying the pressure she surely felt. Judith, of course, was always nearby to notice these failings with acidic comments. "It seems the young lady has her head in the musical clouds, forgetting her basic duties," she would say in a tone loud enough for other staff to hear. Arthur felt his anger simmer, but he knew a direct confrontation without concrete proof would be futile. Judith was a master of waging wars in the shadows. The real crisis erupted on a Friday. Arthur was in his office, reviewing the dividend reports from an international investment fund, when Judith knocked on his door, the urgency in her gesture clearly rehearsed. She didn't enter alone. She brought with her 2 of the longest-serving maids, who looked nervous and uncomfortable. "Mr. Caldwell, I apologize for the interruption," Judith began, her voice dripping with false solemnity. "But a very serious incident has occurred, something that compromises the security and integrity of this home." Arthur put down the papers, his stomach tightening. He knew, instinctively, that this was about Sophia. What happened, Judith? Mrs. Caldwell's watch, the gold wristwatch with the small diamonds, the one you gave her on your last wedding anniversary. It has disappeared. Arthur's blood ran cold. That watch was one of the few objects of Laura's that he kept on his nightstand, a tangible memento of their love. He kept it in a velvet box, rarely opening it as the pain was too intense. "Disappeared? What do you mean?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "I was doing my supervisory rounds of the cleaning. The new cleaner, Sophia, was responsible for cleaning your suite today," Judith said, casting a meaningful glance at the other two women, who nodded stiffly. "I asked to check if everything was in order. The watch box was open and empty." The accusation was clear, the trap perfectly set. Sophia, the outsider, the intruder who had won the family's affection, being framed as a common thief. It was a classic, cruel power move. "Get Sophia in here now," Arthur ordered. Sophia arrived moments later, her face puzzled, wiping her hands on her apron. Upon seeing Judith and the other maids, her expression shifted to one of caution. "Sophia," Arthur began, trying to keep his voice neutral, "Judith has informed me that my wife's watch has disappeared from my bedroom. You were the last person to clean in there." Sophia's eyes widened in shock and hurt. The accusation hit her visibly. "Sir, I would never touch anything that wasn't mine. I cleaned the room, yes, but I barely went near your nightstand. I would never." "It's her word against mine, sir," Judith interrupted, her voice as cold as steel. "And with all due respect, people in desperate situations sometimes do desperate things. Simple people are not always trustworthy when faced with such wealth." The condescension in Judith's voice was unbearable. Arthur was about to explode, to defend Sophia, to accuse Judith of orchestrating the whole thing, but he had no proof. It was his word against hers. And Judith had the loyalty of the staff, which she had cultivated for years with a mix of fear and favoritism. Then Judith played her checkmate. "Mr. Caldwell, I have served this family loyally for 12 years. I have protected your assets and your privacy. I cannot continue to work in an environment where my integrity is questioned and where thieves are tolerated." She paused dramatically. "You need to make a choice. Either she goes or I go. And if I go, I cannot guarantee that the rest of the staff who trust my judgment will remain." It was an ultimatum, a silent mutiny. She was betting that he, the pragmatic businessman, would choose stability, order, over the cleaner who sang at the piano. She was forcing him to sacrifice the one person who had brought light into this dark house. Arthur felt trapped. Business logic screamed at him to cave, to cut the problem at the root, to maintain the structure that ensured his life ran smoothly. But his heart, newly awakened, screamed Sophia's name. He looked at her pale, frightened face, and then at Judith's triumphant one. The silence in the office was deafening. It was in this moment of unbearable tension that a small figure appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. It was Leo. He stood there in his pajamas, clutching a teddy bear, his eyes darting from one face to another, sensing the anguish in the air. No one noticed him at first. All eyes were fixed on Arthur, awaiting his decision. Leo's presence in the doorway changed the dynamics of the office. The adult confrontation, fraught with accusation and power plays, was suddenly interrupted by the silent innocence of a child. Leo looked at Sophia's tear-streaked face, then at Judith's harsh expression, and finally at his father's tormented countenance. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the pain perfectly. His small shoulders slumped, and he walked slowly to Sophia's side, taking her hand in his. It was an instinctive act of loyalty, a clear choice that put Arthur's dilemma to shame. Judith saw the gesture and her face twisted into a sneer. "You see, sir, she has even manipulated the child to her side. It's a despicable tactic." Arthur ignored the comment. His son's touch on Sophia anchored him, clearing his mind. He couldn't give in. To sacrifice Sophia would be to betray not only her, but Leo and the spark of hope she had reignited. No one is going anywhere until this is cleared up, Arthur declared, his voice firm. Judith, I want you and your team to retrace every step you took today. Search every trash can, every vacuum cleaner bag. I do not believe Sophia did this, and I will prove it. And if you find nothing, sir? Judith challenged. The watch isn't just going to reappear. Gold doesn't evaporate. The tension was almost physical. The two maids behind Judith shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. Sophia remained silent, tears streaming down her face, but her hand held Leo's tightly. It was then that Leo did something that shocked everyone more than any word. He let go of Sophia's hand and walked toward Judith. He stopped in front of the housekeeper, who stared down at him with impatience. Leo raised his arm and pointed. His tiny finger wasn't aimed at Judith's face or her hands. It was pointing directly at her wrist. All eyes followed his direction. On Judith's wrist, partially hidden by the sleeve of her starched uniform, gleamed the band of a watch. It wasn't just any watch, it was unmistakable. The braided gold band, the mother-of-pearl face, the small diamonds marking the hours. It was Laura's watch. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and damning. Judith froze, her face transforming into a mask of pure panic. She instinctively tried to hide her wrist, but the movement was a confession in itself. This isn't what it looks like, she stammered, her voice losing all its authority. It's mine. It's similar, that's all. But the lie was weak, desperate. That watch was a one-of-a-kind, custom-designed piece. There was no other like it in the world. Arthur felt a wave of fury so intense it made him dizzy. The betrayal, the cruelty, the manipulation, it was all so low, so vile. He walked slowly toward Judith, his gaze locked on hers. "Take off the watch, Judith." "Sir, I swear it's a misunderstanding," she pleaded, taking a step back. "Take off the watch," he repeated, each word landing like a hammer blow. With trembling hands, Judith undid the clasp and handed the watch to Arthur. He took it. The metal was still warm from her skin. Turning it over, he saw the small inscription on the back, the words he himself had ordered engraved, "My forever time, with love, A." The proof was irrefutable. The truth, revealed not by an investigation or a confession, but by the watchful eyes of a child who could smell a lie. "How dare you?" Arthur whispered, his voice filled with an icy contempt. "How dare you use my wife's memory to frame an innocent person?" Judith broke down, sobbing with despair and humiliation. "I don't know how it got on my wrist. Someone must have put it there to frame me. It was her," she cried, pointing a trembling finger at Sophia. But no one believed her. Her guilt was written all over her face. The two maids who had backed her now stared at the floor, ashamed to have been part of the charade. Leo, who had remained silent the whole time, looked at Judith and, with a clarity that pierced everyone's heart, said a single word, a word he hadn't spoken for over a year, but which now emerged with a final, absolute judgment. "Ugly." He wasn't referring to her appearance, but to her soul. In that moment, Leo was not just a child who had found his voice. He was the conscience of that house. Leo's word, "ugly," echoed in the office with the force of a verdict. There was no anger in his childish voice, just a simple, devastating statement of fact. Judith crumbled, the facade of authority and control dissolving into pathetic sobs. The truth, laid so bare, was unbearable. She had been unmasked not by the multimillionaire boss, but by a child she had considered a broken pawn on her domestic chessboard. Arthur took the watch from her limp hand. The cold metal in his palm seemed to carry the weight of all the betrayal. He turned to the two maids who had stood with Judith, her silent witnesses. "Did you know about this?" he asked, his voice flat, which made it all the more menacing. The two women flinched. One of them, the younger one, stammered, "No, sir, I swear. She told us she was sure Sophia took it. We trusted her." The loyalty enforced by fear had shattered. Judith's army disbanded the moment her lie was exposed. Arthur nodded slowly. "Pack your things," he said to Judith, his tone final and irrevocable. "I want you off my property in 1 hour. Your severance will be calculated according to the law, but your reference will be the truth of what happened here today." He then turned to the other two. "You are both on probation. Blind loyalty is not a virtue I value. I expect to see independent judgment from you in the future." They nodded quickly, relieved and terrified at the same time, and practically fled the office, leaving their former boss behind. Judith, her face stained with tears, looked at Arthur one last time, a mixture of pleading and hatred in her eyes. "After all these years," she whispered. "Those years were paid for, Judith, and paid very well. What is priceless is trust, and you have pulverized it." With that, he turned his back on her, a gesture of dismissal more powerful than any words. She stood there for a moment, a broken figure amidst the opulence of the officee, and then shuffled out, the deposed queen of a kingdom of dust and order. The room fell silent. Arthur, Sophia, and Leo. The air, once thick with tension and falsehood, now felt clean, rarefied. Arthur walked to his nightstand and placed Laura's watch back in its velvet box, closing the lid gently. He was putting away not just the watch, but a painful chapter of their lives. He turned to Sophia, who was still standing, processing the turn of events. Leo's hand was still in hers. "Sophia, I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry you went through this, that I doubted, even for a second." "You didn't doubt," she said, her voice low but firm. "You sought the truth. That's more than most would do." Their eyes met, and for the first time, there was no barrier of employer and employee between them. There was only the shared vulnerability of two people who had faced a storm together and come out the other side. There was respect, and something more, something deeper, that neither of them yet dared to name. The attraction was undeniable, but it wasn't the cliché dynamic of the millionaire and the maid. It was a connection forged in the fire of crisis, a mutual recognition of strength, integrity, and the silent pain they both carried. Arthur knew in that moment that his life had changed forever. Judith's departure wasn't just the firing of a housekeeper, it was the demolition of an old structure, of a life governed by protocols and appearances. He was free to rebuild, but he didn't know how. He could manage a multi-billion-dollar investment portfolio, but he had no idea how to manage a home. He began, feeling strangely lost. "I don't know how things will work now. The house, the staff. It will be okay," Sophia said, with a calm certainty that instantly soothed him. "People just need fair direction. They will follow kindness as easily as they followed fear." She looked down at Leo, who leaned his head against her hip, exhausted from the emotional ordeal. "We will be okay." The "we" she used struck him. It wasn't you and Leo. It was we. A small word that suggested a unit, a partnership. In that instant, Arthur realized that the healing of his home and his heart didn't depend on hiring a new housekeeper or setting new rules. It depended on the woman standing before him, the woman who had given him back his son's voice and his home's music. He had a choice to make. He could simply thank her, give her a substantial raise as a reward for her loyalty, and keep things as they were. Or he could acknowledge what was happening, the bond that was forming, and risk investing in something far more volatile and potentially far more rewarding than any stock or cryptocurrency: happiness. With Judith's departure, a power vacuum was created in the mansion, but instead of chaos, an unexpected calm settled in. It was as if a constant atmospheric pressure had been lifted, allowing everyone to breathe more freely. The staff, free from tyrannical supervision, began to work with a new sense of purpose. There were more quiet conversations in the hallways, smiles exchanged, a lightness the house hadn't known in years. Sophia, without any formal orders, became the home's natural center of gravity. She didn't give commands, but people came to her. The cook asked for her opinion on the week's menu. The gardener brought in flowers for the vase in the music room. The other staff sought her out to mediate small disputes or simply to talk. She led with empathy, the same empathy she had used to reach Leo. Arthur watched this transformation with fascination. He realized how little he understood about the ecosystem of his own home. He provided the capital, the assets, the hardware, but Sophia provided the cohesion, the emotional cash flow that made it all work. He began to deliberately step back from household management, trusting her judgment, and the house flourished. But the most profound change was in Leo. With Judith's shadow gone, he burst forth in a kaleidoscope of words and sounds. It was as if the dam holding back his voice had broken. He talked non-stop, asking questions about everything, describing his toys, narrating his games. The silence that once haunted the mansion was replaced by the incessant chatter of a 7-year-old discovering the power of communication. His voice was the sweetest return on the investment of trust Arthur had ever made. The music sessions became the highlight of the day. They were no longer just about Leo and Sophia. Arthur began to participate, sitting not as a spectator, but as an audience member. Leo, emboldened, started singing along with Sophia, his voice small and enthusiastic. One day, Sophia found an old guitar of Laura's stored in a closet. She tuned it, and as she played a folk song, Arthur found himself humming along. The scene was almost surreal. The billionaire, the cleaner, and the boy, forming a small off-key band in a room full of expensive furniture, united by nothing more than a simple melody and a shared sense of belonging. It was during one of these afternoons that Arthur began to truly see the woman behind the uniform. He asked about her life, her past, hesitantly at first, and then with growing confidence, Sophia told her story. She spoke of her love for music, of her dream to open a small music school for children. She spoke of her husband, an engineer with a poet's soul, who had supported her unconditionally. And she spoke of the paralyzing grief of his sudden loss, a car accident that took not only her love, but her voice. "I stopped singing. I stopped playing," she confided, her eyes fixed on a distant point. Every note was a memory. The piano became an enemy. "I applied for cleaning jobs because it was honest work that asked nothing of my soul." Arthur listened, his heart aching with empathy. He understood. He too had hidden in his work, in his numbers, in his deals, because they were places his grief couldn't reach him. He realized Sophia wasn't just healing Leo, she was healing herself. The mansion, with its silent piano and its mute boy, had become an unexpected stage for both their recoveries. The attraction he felt for her deepened, transforming from gratitude into profound admiration. He admired her strength, her resilience, the way she turned pain into kindness. He found himself increasingly drawn not just to her calming presence, but to her mind, her subtle humor, the light that was returning to her eyes. One evening, after Leo was asleep, Arthur found her in the kitchen making tea. "Sophia," he began, the formality of her name sounding strange now. "I've been thinking about what you told me, about your dream." She turned, a teacup in her hands. "You brought music back to my house. I'd like to help bring music back to your life, permanently." He handed her an envelope. "This isn't a payment, it's an investment in talent and in a good heart." Curious, she opened it. Inside, there was no cash, but the deed to a small property downtown, a charming commercial space with large windows. There were also the registration documents for a new company, Harmony Music Studio, the seed capital, enough to renovate the space and purchase all the necessary instruments, had already been deposited into an account in the company's name. Sophia was speechless, looking from the papers to his face. "Sir, Arthur, I can't accept this. It's too much." "Please," he said, his voice soft. Don't deny me the joy of making an investment that I know will bring the greatest return in the world, the happiness of children learning music. And yours." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of joy, of a hope so large it was almost painful. She looked at him, and in that gaze, Arthur saw the reflection of his own feelings, the beginning of a melody they both thought they would never hear again. Arthur's offer was more than a gesture of generosity. It was a bridge that spanned the social chasm separating them, inviting Sophia to step out of her role as an employee and into his life as an equal. Accepting the music studio wasn't just accepting a gift, it was accepting this new dynamic, and that scared her as much as it thrilled her. In the following days, a delicate dance of approach began between them. The studio became a shared project. Arthur, using his business acumen, helped her navigate the bureaucracy, hire contractors, and order the best instruments. Sophia, with her musical knowledge and sensitivity, planned the layout, chose the colors, and imagined the sound of laughter and melodies that would soon fill the space. They spent hours poring over blueprints and catalogs, the conversation flowing easily from professional to personal. They talked about their favorite music, the books they read, the small joys and sorrows of their past lives. Arthur discovered that Sophia possessed a quiet wisdom, a perspective on life that made his billions of dollars seem secondary. Sophia discovered an Arthur the business world didn't know, a man with a dry wit, a secret passion for old movies, and a deep capacity for love that had been buried by grief. Leo, oblivious to the adult complexities, was the golden link that bound them. To him, this new partnership was the most natural thing in the world. "Dad," Sophia said, "I can learn the drums at the studio," he would announce enthusiastically at dinner. Or, "Sophia, Dad told me Grandma Laura loved Chopin too, just like you." He spoke of them in the same breath, as if they were already a unit, a family. The attraction between Arthur and Sophia grew daily, an undercurrent that became increasingly difficult to ignore. It was in the lingering glances across the dinner table, the accidental brushes of hands as they passed in the hallway, the smiles that bloomed spontaneously when their eyes met. There was a growing intimacy that came not from romantic gestures, but from the simple, profound joy of sharing everyday life. Yet, a shadow of doubt hung over Arthur. He was a man accustomed to controlling outcomes, to mitigating risks. His feelings for Sophia were the biggest risk he had ever taken. What if he was confusing gratitude with love? What if he was just trying to fill the void Laura had left, using Sophia as a substitute? Worse, what if the outside world, with its cruel judgments, destroyed the fragile happiness they were building? The story of the billionaire and the cleaner was a feast for the tabloids, a narrative that would be twisted and cheapened, staining the purity of what they had. The fear of exposing Sophia and Leo to that kind of scrutiny paralyzed him. Sophia had her own fears. She was falling in love with Arthur, but she wondered if she could ever truly belong in his world of wealth and power. It was a world of private jets and charity galas, where people donated sums that could support her family for a lifetime. She was a simple woman whose greatest treasure was a collection of old sheet music. Could she, a grieving musician who had found solace in cleaning, really find a home beside a man who was a force of nature in the financial world? Was her love for him real, or was it just the vertigo of being rescued from a life of hardship? The emotional tension between them peaked one rainy night, about a week before the studio was set to open. Leo had a fever, nothing serious, just a common cold, but enough to make him tearful and clingy. Sophia stayed by his bedside, singing softly and placing cool cloths on his forehead. Arthur came into the room and stopped in the doorway, watching the scene. The image of Sophia caring for his son with such love and tenderness under the soft glow of the bedside lamp was so painfully beautiful it dissolved all his doubts. This wasn't gratitude. This wasn't a replacement. This was love, a quiet, mature love, born from shared pain and mutual healing. Sophia looked up and saw him. There was a silent question in her eyes, a vulnerability that mirrored his own. "He'll be okay," she whispered. "I know," Arthur replied, his voice hoarse with emotion. He walked to the bed and placed his hand on her shoulder. The touch was electric, a confirmation of everything they both felt but were afraid to admit. "Stay," he said, the word coming out like a plea. "Please, not just for tonight. Stay always." The question wasn't about her job. It was about their life, their future. The music studio was nearly finished. Her financial independence secured. She didn't need him anymore. And that was exactly why her answer would mean everything. Arthur's plea, "Stay always," hung in the quiet room, more powerful and binding than any business contract he had ever signed. It wasn't a formal marriage proposal, but something far more fundamental, a request for her to become a permanent part of their lives, to weave her story into theirs. Sophia felt the weight and the beauty of that moment. She looked at Leo's sleeping face, his breathing soft, and even now that the fever had begun to subside, she looked at Arthur's hand on her shoulder, a warm, steady presence that offered not just support, but partnership. All her fears about the differences in their worlds, about the opinions of others, about being enough, seemed small and distant compared to the undeniable truth of her feelings. The love she felt for this man and this boy was the clearest, truest melody her heart had ever known. "I'm not going anywhere," she answered, her voice thick but firm. A single tear rolled down her cheek, and Arthur, with his thumb, gently wiped it away. It was a gesture of profound intimacy, a seal on a silent promise. The moment of greatest tension had not come from an external conflict, from a villain to be vanquished, but from within themselves. It was the culmination of their individual journeys of grief and the acceptance that happiness was possible again. The true emotional resolution lay in allowing themselves to be vulnerable, in accepting the love they had found in each other. In the days that followed, a new harmony settled in the mansion. The final barrier between them had crumbled. They hadn't yet defined the relationship with words, but they didn't need to. It was evident in the way they started and ended their days together, in the ease of their conversations, in the way Leo would run from one to the other, treating them as a cohesive unit. The grand opening of the Harmony Music Studio was the climax of this transformation. It wasn't a lavish event for high society, as Arthur might have arranged in the past. It was an intimate celebration, just for them and the mansion staff, who now saw them not as boss and employee, but as a couple, a family in the making. The studio was beautiful, a bright, welcoming space filled with instruments that gleamed under the new lights. Sophia was radiant, walking through her realized dream, her eyes shining with a joy Arthur had never seen. At the center of the main room, there was a small stage. Leo, without a trace of shyness, climbed onto it. "I want to sing a song," he announced. Sophia sat at the newly acquired grand piano, and Arthur stood in the small audience, his heart overflowing. Sophia began to play the soft melody of Laura's lullaby, and then Leo's voice rose, clear and sweet, singing the song his mother had taught him and that Sophia had helped him find again. It was a tribute, a bridge between the past and the present. As Leo sang, he looked at his father and then at Sophia, the smile on his face connecting them, blessing their union. At the end of the song, the applause from the small audience was warm and sincere. Arthur walked onto the stage. He hadn't prepared a speech. He spoke from the heart. For a long time, I believed my power came from my fortune, from my net worth, from my stocks on Wall Street, he began, his voice steady. I was wrong. True power, true wealth is human connection. It's finding the music in the silence. He turned to Sophia, who was looking at him with tear-filled eyes. Sophia, You taught me how to be a father again. You taught me how to listen with my heart. You brought harmony back to my home and to my soul." He then knelt on one knee, taking a small velvet box from his pocket. It wasn't an ostentatious ring with a diamond the size of a new cryptocurrency, but a simple, elegant gold band with a single musical note engraved on it. "I know our beginning was unconventional, but I can't imagine an end to my life that doesn't include you. Sophia, will you marry me and turn our duet into a symphony for the rest of our lives?" Everyone in the room held their breath. Leo ran to Sophia's side, looking up at her with hopeful eyes. Sophia, laughing through tears of happiness, knelt too to be at eye level with Leo and Arthur. "Yes," she whispered, the answer directed at them both. "Yes, I will." Sophia's yes was the final, perfect chord that resolved all dissonance. On that small stage, under the warm lights of her music studio, the three of them embraced, forming a circle of love and belonging. The mansion staff, who had witnessed the entire journey, applauded with genuine joy. It was no longer a story of a boss and an employee, but the story of two wounded souls who, through patience and music, found healing in each other, with a child as their conductor. The wedding was set for the spring, and the months that followed were filled with a quiet, constructive happiness. The mansion, once a symbol of cold, silent wealth, was transformed into a vibrant home. Leo's laughter echoed through the halls, mingling with the melodies that floated from the music room, where Sophia now composed her own songs. Each character's arc found its natural conclusion. Leo, the boy whom trauma had silenced, was now a talkative, curious, and secure child. Music had unlocked not only his voice, but his trust in the world. He spent his afternoons at Sophia's studio, trying out different instruments. His joy, the living proof of the family's journey of recovery. Sophia flourished in her new role. She ran the Harmony Studio with passion and skill, and her classes for community children quickly became a success. She had found her voice again, not just for singing, but for leading, inspiring, and teaching. She was no longer the grieving widow hiding behind a cleaner's uniform. She was an artist, an entrepreneur, a partner, and above all, a mother to Leo in every way that mattered. She found her place in Arthur's world not as an intruder, but as the missing piece, bringing warmth, music, and balance. Arthur underwent the most profound transformation. He learned that true net worth wasn't on his bank statements, but in the moments shared with his family. He delegated more responsibilities in his businesses, reorienting his life not around profit, but around presence. He learned to unplug, to be truly present at dinners, during games, in conversations. He discovered that the greatest return on his time was the smile on Leo's face and the sound of Sophia's laughter. His dynamic with his staff changed as well. The fairness and empathy he had shown in Judith's case set a new tone. He came to know his employees as people, not cogs in a machine. And the loyalty he received in return was far stronger than anything Judith's fear had ever commanded. The main conflicts were satisfyingly resolved. Leo's silence was healed not by expensive medical intervention, but by human connection. The internal threat posed by Judith was exposed and removed, cleansing the environment of falsehood and fear. And the internal conflict within Arthur and Sophia, their fears, their insecurities about love after loss, was resolved through mutual trust and the acceptance of their happiness. One day, while sorting through some old papers in his office, Arthur found a photograph of Laura. He smiled, a soft sadness, but without the sharp pain of before. He knew Laura would always be a part of his story, but his love for her did not diminish his love for Sophia. They were different chapters in the same book. He placed the photo in a silver frame on his desk next to a recent picture of himself, Sophia, and Leo, laughing in the garden. The past and the present, coexisting in peace. That evening, he found Sophia sitting at the piano, playing softly. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I was thinking about what a strange composition life is," she said, her fingers still moving over the keys. "Sometimes the rests, the silences, are just as important as the notes." Arthur kissed her temple. You filled my silence with the most beautiful music I've ever heard." There was no longer pain in the memory of silence, only gratitude for the music that came after. The narrative arcs were complete, the conflicts resolved, and the future stretched before them like a blank sheet of music, ready to be filled with the notes of their new life together. Spring arrived, dressing the mansion's gardens in the vibrant colors of blooming flowers. Arthur and Sophia's wedding day was not an event for the society pages, but a celebration of the life they had rebuilt. The ceremony took place on the back lawn, under an arch of white roses, with the soft sound of a string quartet composed of Sophia's best students. Replacing the traditional bridal march, Leo, in a small suit, was the proud ring-bearer, walking down the grass aisle with adorable seriousness, handing the rings first to Sophia and then to his father with a smile that was the very embodiment of happiness. Arthur, standing under the arch, watched Sophia walk toward him. She wore a simple, elegant dress the color of ivory, and in her hands she carried not a bouquet, but a single white rose, the same kind the gardener used to leave for her in the music room. In that moment, he didn't see the cleaner he had hired out of desperation, nor even the talented musician she was. He saw his partner, his safe harbor, the woman who had taught him that the greatest investment a man can make is in someone else's heart. The vows they exchanged were not extravagant promises, but heartfelt declarations of a truth they had learned together. "I offer you not my fortune, but my time," Arthur said, "not my wealth, but my respect, and not the promise of a life without trouble, but the certainty that we will never face the silence alone again." "I offer you not the cure for all pain," Sophia said, "but the music for all silences. I offer you my friendship, my loyalty, and the promise that our home will always be filled with more laughter than tears." When they kissed, the applause from the handful of guests was drowned out by Leo's triumphant laugh as he ran to embrace them, sealing the formation of their new family. The story's conclusion was not a fairy tale ending, but the beginning of a real and happy life, earned through small acts of courage and trust. Sophia's studio prospered, becoming a beloved community hub, a place where children from all backgrounds could discover the joy of music. Arthur found a new passion, philanthropy focused on arts and education, using his capital not just to generate more money, but to create opportunities, to fund dreams like Sophia's. The mansion, once a silent mausoleum, was now a home. The loudest sound was no longer the silence, but a harmonious blend of Leo's laughter, Sophia's piano, and the lively conversations at the dinner table. The transformation was complete. On a summer evening, years later, Arthur sat on the porch with Sophia, watching Leo, now a preteen, teach a friend a few chords on the guitar in the garden. "Do you remember that first day?" Arthur asked. "When you just sat on the floor of the playroom, in silence," Sophia smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I remember a very lonely little boy, and a father with the saddest eyes I had ever seen." "And now?" he asked, seeking her gaze. "Now I see a home," she replied, "a home that love rebuilt." Money had given him power over the world, but not over his grief. Love, however, had given him the power to heal that grief and to find true wealth. Not in assets or holdings, but in the simple, beautiful symphony of a happy family. The melody of their lives would continue, with its high notes and low, but they knew that as long as they were together, the music would never stop.